At first, it was hard to tell what it was, perhaps a herd of buffalo, she thought, but Rakra's sharp vision revealed the truth. His face darkened with fear. Now he understood the meaning of his dream. Another group of lizard men was coming. They resembled Rakra's people, but their skin was blue, like his. Some rode on beasts trained for battle, their faces twisted with rage. Their approach was swift and filled with menace. Soon, they were close enough to see clearly. They were massive in build, with long tails and elongated snouts. At the front of the group rode a stout male, the leader of the Lizard Men clan. He rode upon a massive, fearsome beast bristling with claws and jagged spikes. How anyone had managed to tame such a creature was beyond her understanding. Rocker turned his gaze toward the caravan, noting the sheer number of people moving within it. There were so many that it seemed as though their entire tribe had traveled together. Since they were from the same region as the Rocker clan, the implication was clear: their homeland must have been completely destroyed. Rocker hissed bitterly, remarking that it was likely true, and with dry irony added that perhaps the monstrous beast they rode had devoured everything, swamps and all. Whatever had driven them to leave, they were now drawing close to the foot of the hill. There, young lizard scouts from their own tribe appeared at the summit. Restless by nature, they waved and shouted, eager to draw attention to themselves. Their taunts and reckless gestures challenged the caravan without thought for the danger. The caravan halted at the base of the hill. The largest among them, clearly the leader, simply smiled. Ju and Rocker let out a faint sigh of relief, for on this day, it was Yura's team who stood guard. Even so, Ju feared the worst. If a battle broke out, they could not hope to defeat so many lizard men. The clan would be forced from the oasis and condemned to wander the desert once more. Everything now depended on the nameless god of beetles. If he favored them, they might yet defend their home and drive away these strangers. As he examined the spear in his hand, Rocker quietly shared a different suspicion with Ju. Perhaps their deity's will was not to test their strength at all, but to set a new task before them. Rocker believed the beetle god had deliberately guided the lizard men to the oasis. To Ju, this idea was baffling. Rocker explained that their mission was not combat, but coexistence. Just as their own people had once wandered the desert in search of sanctuary, so too had these lizards come seeking survival. Ju countered with doubt. The leader of this new clan was known to him one who respected only power. He had cast out the weak and sick without hesitation, never sparing resources for them. How could such a man be convinced to live in peace? Before Rocker could respond, familiar butterflies began to circle around them, the unmistakable sign of the nameless god of beetles. To Rocker, this was confirmation. The mission was not to destroy their kin, but to accept them and bring them into the beetle god's faith. It was a far more difficult trial than battle, for compelling obedience and belief would demand everything he had. Still, it was the will of God, and he would follow. He set off behind the guiding butterfly, the same messenger that always revealed the path of their deity's intent. They were bound to fulfill the divine command. Nebula observed the exchange between Rocker and Ju, understanding perfectly the nature of Rocker's revelation. To affirm his chosen one's realization, Nebula had sent the butterfly itself. His will was for the tribes to unite, to share knowledge and skills so that together they might flourish, and in their unification, Nebula would gain new followers. His chosen one had reached these conclusions unaided, which pleased him greatly. Now all that remained was to watch and hope Rocker acted with wisdom. Rocker's will was formidable, too strong to be manipulated directly. Nebula could only influence him with dreams and subtle signs. Still, he reflected on Rocker's ability to reason and the clarity of his thoughts. In the end, Rocker understood the arrival of the other lizards was indeed the will of God. He unleashed a swarm of locusts upon the swamps where the rival clan resided. The ravenous insects consumed every shred of vegetation and wiped out the animals that lived there, leaving the land barren. With their home destroyed, the clan was forced to abandon the swamps. Nebula, who observed these events closely, considered Rakra a fair leader with remarkable self-confidence. This quality impressed him deeply. Though Nebula wished he could intervene, he knew he could not alter the course of fate. All he could do was guide the willpower of the hero. Meanwhile, Rakra rallied Jal and his trusted warriors, leading them toward the enemy clan. These fighters were among the most formidable of his people. At the foot of the hill, the lizardmen halted, watching as their enemies approached. Their leader, mounted upon a monstrous beast, rode ahead of his followers. With mocking arrogance, he taunted Rakra, calling him a child and openly provoking him, demanding to know whether they truly lived here. The warriors of Rakra's clan hissed in outrage at the insult. Their anger burned at the contempt directed toward their leader. In response, Rakra roared back that this was indeed their land, and they had lived here for generations. Unmoved, the enemy leader continued his jeers, ridiculing Rakra and belittling his clan. He questioned what treasure they were protecting and what secrets lay hidden beyond the hill. Rakra's defiance only grew. Boldly, he listed what the hill concealed: trees, bushes, water, and food. Yet with his final step forward, he declared in a voice that carried across the land that the most valuable thing guarded here was God. The enemy leader scoffed at his words, asking mockingly if Rakra truly believed the foolish tales about a god hiding in the valley. But Rakra remained steadfast. He proclaimed that the oasis they lived in was the land of the nameless god of beetles, and that they would defend it with their lives. His conviction made the strangers laugh. Their leader dismissed Rakra's claim as nonsense and, with a cold smile, commanded him to abandon the land at once. If they left immediately, he promised not to attack. To strengthen his threat, he spurred the massive creature beneath him. The beast hissed and bared its teeth, its eyes gleaming with hunger for the coming battle. This monster, a lizard of the Manon species grown to colossal size, was a terrifying sight. The enemy leader glanced at Rakra's small group of warriors, noting their inferior numbers and meager weapons. With a cruel smirk, he told Rakra that resistance was futile. To deepen his mockery, he tapped his temple, ridiculing Rakra as if he lacked the intelligence to see reason. His clan, the Blue Lizards, vastly outnumbered Rakra's. Rakra swallowed his anger but did not falter. Leveling his spear toward the towering beast, he stood tall and unshaken, his stance a clear declaration that he would defend his homeland to the end. With fierce pride in his voice, he hissed that he had no desire to fight, but neither would he yield. The enemy leader bristled with irritation. He was accustomed to resolving disputes through force, and this bold resistance tested his patience. Yet Rakra, turning to face the Blue Lizard clan, raised his voice so all could hear. He declared that he knew the pain of losing one's home and offered them another path. If they chose to abandon their leader and accept the faith of the nameless god of beetles, they would gain divine blessings, protection, food, and a place among his people. For a moment, silence fell. Then, the enemy leader burst into laughter, the sound echoing across the desert. He mocked Rakra as a fool who could not even count properly, pointing to the sheer size of his own tribe. If Rakra had more warriors hidden behind the hill, perhaps he might stand a chance, but as it was, victory was impossible. Rakra, however, only smiled faintly. With calm defiance, he replied that even if he did not yet know the true measure of their god's power, he needed no hidden army. The warriors standing beside him were enough. If the Blue Lizard clan wished to remain in this land, they must submit to Rakra's leadership and obey his will. He gave them a few moments to decide. During this time, he stood fearlessly before the enemy, clutching his sturdy spear. The clan leader, Lear, mocked Rakra, calling him a deranged weakling, dismissing his words as pure nonsense. The insult burned deep, and fury consumed him. With rage coursing through his veins, Rakra kicked the beast at his feet. Lear, sneering, barked an order to his clan to attack. Growling, they surged forward. As they closed in, Rakra silently prayed to the nameless god of beetles. The leader commanded the beast, Manon, to finish off the so-called daredevil. Yet Rakra remained rooted in place, spear gripped tightly. whispering desperate prayers for courage and strength to withstand the onslaught. Manon lunged, swinging its massive clawed paw. Rakra met the blow with his spear, but the impact was devastating, splintering the weapon into fragments with a harsh crack. Now unarmed, he faced the rabid beast's savage gaze, clinging only to his faith. Lear looked upon him with contempt, a cruel smile stretching across his face. Weak, he sneered, as Manon's colossal paw loomed overhead, ready to crush Rakra. Without divine intervention, his end was certain, yet he did not falter. In the Lost World, players could unlock new abilities if their divinity grew or they gained fresh domains of influence. Nebula had been watching this clan closely, and his devotion was rewarded. He could now descend into the body of a chosen hero, granting them strength beyond mortal limits. A gleam sparked in Rakra's eyes. His prayers had been heard. Time itself seemed to pause as a radiant light pierced the sky, streaking downward like a falling star. The energy coursed through Manon's paw and struck Rakra's body like a bolt of lightning, cloaking him in brilliance. The attackers froze in shock, stunned by the unprecedented sight. Lear scoffed, assuming Rakra had been struck down by divine punishment. But as the light faded, Rakra still stood transformed. In the instant Manon's paw descended, Nebula had entered Rakra's body. The sensation of inhabiting the mortal form was strange compared to Nebula's vast lizard shape, but power pulsed through him. Lear's eyes widened in disbelief. "Impossible," he growled, vowing to correct this error. With another command, he urged Manon to attack again. Through Rakra's eyes, Nebula perceived the beast's movements as though slowed by time. Analyzing its profile, he studied its strengths and weaknesses. Manon was a formidable creature, brimming with power, yet destroying it outright would waste a valuable prize. Rakra himself had potential to win, but against two foes he would not have survived alone. With Nebula within him, however, victory was inevitable. He surged forward to meet the charging monster. A gaping maw, lined with jagged teeth, snapped toward him, aiming for his throat. But Nebula invoked a divine skill, God's avatar, an ability that multiplied Rakra's natural power 600 times. With godlike might, Nebula seized Manon's massive jaws, wrenching them apart before flipping the beast effortlessly into the air. The clan leader, astride its back, nearly lost his seat, barely clinging on. Manon, 5 meters of raw monstrous muscle, crashed down on its back with a thunderous impact. All who witnessed it stared in awe. Never before had they seen such overwhelming power. The mighty beast, crushed beneath its own weight, lay sprawled in the dust, defeated by the man they had called weak. The leader lay motionless, groaning as though bidding farewell to his life. Manu crashed down with a deafening thud, his head striking a rock so hard that he never rose again. His body sprawled across the ground, paws spread wide. The warriors of the Rakaka clan erupted in shouts of admiration for their leader, amazed at the miracle they had just witnessed. Rocker studied Maynel carefully, worried the impact might have been fatal. Fortunately, Maynel still lived, though unconscious, and this suited Rocker perfectly, for he already had a plan in mind. The warriors who had followed him down the hill celebrated with unrestrained joy, their voices echoing in triumph. Rocker was just about to step away from Maynel when the voice of the blue lizard leader rang out again. At first, Rocker could not understand what he was muttering. None present could believe the man had survived such a fall, especially after being crushed beneath Maynel's full weight. With a roar, the blue lizard leader writhed in fury, struggling to free himself from beneath the beast. His claws reached desperately for his bronze sword. At last, his fingers closed around the weapon. With a snarl, he struck at Maynel's tail, venting his rage upon the creature. His anger toward Rakaka grew even hotter. He screamed accusations, calling Rocker a fraud, warning him not to turn his back, and vowing that he would never surrender. When Rocker ignored his frenzied cries, the leader's fury boiled over. Sword in hand, he charged after him in a reckless attempt to strike him down. Rocker merely turned his head, offering only a contemptuous smile at the pathetic sight. The blue lizard leader lunged to stab him from behind, but Rocker, empowered by divine strength, acted first. With one swift motion, he seized the leader by the neck and lifted him high. A sharp crack echoed across the battlefield. The leader of the blue lizards hung limp, his life extinguished, before his body dropped lifelessly at Rocker's feet. Rocker's gaze swept over the warriors of the blue lizard clan. He demanded to know who among them would be next to share their leader's fate. A hush fell over the desert, broken only by the sound of weapons clattering to the ground. None dared oppose him. One by one, the lizards dropped to their knees, heads bowed low, swearing allegiance to Rocker and pledging obedience to his will. Even Rocker could scarcely believe his plan had succeeded. The nameless god of the beetles had heard his prayers and granted him supernatural might. His thoughts drifted like fog, yet he stood unshaken before his defeated foes, listening as the warriors sang his name in triumph. Far above, seated upon his throne, Nebula watched with satisfaction. His carefully laid strategy had borne fruit, and Rocker had once again fulfilled his expectations. The blue lizards, now part of the clan, climbed the hill in turn to glimpse their new home. They marveled with the same excitement the Rakaka had once felt. At a great feast that night, they sat among their new kin, speaking only of their leader's strength. Rocker told them they were not two clans but one, for long ago they had been driven out due to age and sickness. Though their appearance differed, their skin had changed only because of the blessing of their god who had given them health, strength, and endurance. The blue lizards listened in rapt silence as Rocker recounted how they had wandered the desert until guided here by signs from the nameless god of beetles. Everything they now saw before them was the work of this unseen deity. Out of gratitude for their salvation, they too began to worship him. Their god dwelled beyond the stars, unseen, but his strength flowed into those who truly believed and offered worship. Rocker pointed toward the altar, continuing to share the story of their deity and the sacrifices offered in his name that very day. He revealed the immense power he could grant to those he deemed worthy. Seeing Rocker standing alone, Jael cautiously approached him. With a hint of certainty, she suggested that their god had entered his body. Rocker confirmed this, though he admitted he could not clearly recall how it had happened. God himself had performed a miracle using his body. Yet something else weighed heavily on Jael's mind. She glanced around to ensure no one else could overhear before voicing her concern. The problem was resources. The Blue Lizard clan was far too large for such a small oasis, with nearly 30 individuals to provide for. Lowering her head, she sighed in frustration. If they united, their supplies would quickly vanish, leaving the oasis devastated. Rakra's response left her shocked. When the oasis was depleted, they would simply leave. It was the only possible solution. But Jael argued that survival in the desert would be even harder, especially with so many mouths to feed. They needed a plan. Rakra turned his gaze toward the vast desert, as though the answer might be hidden within it. They had a little more time to think, but the solution was already before them, their newly formed tribe. Many of its members possessed the skills and knowledge necessary to advance further. The next day began with the wild rustling of bushes and grass, like a storm was sweeping through. But it was no hurricane, it was Manhwa. Refusing to obey anyone, the beast had lost his master and wanted no new one. His only intent was to escape. Manhwa hissed and lunged at the lizardmen guarding him. With his powerful paws, he knocked aside their spears and scattered them effortlessly. Anyone who dared to step closer was beaten back. Baring his sharp teeth, he displayed his terrifying strength. Though tied to a tree while unconscious, Manhwa now pulled against it with such force that the trunk nearly tore free from the ground. One of the guards, seeing the danger, urged the others to flee before it was too late. They risked severe punishment or even death if the beast turned on them. Manhwa's blazing yellow eyes were filled with fury. He would not yield. His hissing echoed endlessly, and it seemed he had already chosen his first victim. Drawn by the commotion, Rockrak appeared, holding a bundle of food that Manhwa favored. His plan was simple: to tame him. The beast recognized Rockrak, remembering his overwhelming strength and the ease with which he had once defeated him. Snarling loudly, he fixed his gaze upon him. But Rockrak approached calmly, showing the food in his hands. He spoke softly, assuring Manel of his good intentions. Step by step, he closed the distance, extending the offering for the beast to inspect. The plant was one of Manel's favorite foods, and hunger gnawed at him after days of wandering the desert without a meal. He sniffed the fruit, its scent irresistible. Piece by piece, he devoured it eagerly. The guards watched in disbelief as the once raging beast peacefully ate from Rockrak's hand. Once again, Rockrak astonished them with his boldness and ingenuity. When the meal was gone, Manel pressed his nose gently against Rockrak's palm, a gesture of gratitude. Rockrak promised him more food if he listened and behaved. He believed their nameless god had spared this creature for a reason that now became clear. He had to tame and care for him. The beast studied Rockrak's eyes, as if searching for his true intentions, before bowing his head in silent agreement. Rockrak smiled and winked at the guards, playfully calling the creature baby, and told them to summon him whenever it misbehaved. Stunned, the guards could only shake their heads in silence. Another miracle had unfolded before their eyes. The feral beast had become tame. Later, Rockra met with Jael once again. He shared his belief that God had brought them together to pool their knowledge. Spinning a metal knife in his hands, he explained that some within the clan knew how to smelt metal and could teach them. The knife had been given to him long ago by one of the blue lizards, who had already begun experimenting with metallurgy. Rockra confessed that he had long dreamed of crafting such weapons for his tribesmen, but the short-sightedness of their former leader had prevented it. Extracting metal required heating it to extremely high temperatures, which demanded another precious resource, wood. Without it, their efforts would be futile. Several trees had to be cut. The knife-making master explained that there was a technique he had never been able to try because their leader had forbidden the cutting of trees. To achieve it, a certain amount of wood needed to be burned to create an essential component that would raise the temperature significantly, making the metal harder and far more resistant. Rocker told the master he would consider the proposal and give his decision the next day. The master agreed to wait and left. Rocker thought that if they were planning to leave the hill soon, cutting a few trees might not be a problem if it served a greater purpose. As he was thinking, Rocker noticed an old one-armed lizard walking toward him. The lizard was only passing by but politely greeted the master, whom Rocker had just dismissed. Introducing himself respectfully, the lizard said he had heard from others in the camp that the new leader was looking for an experienced guide. Rocker studied him closely and quickly concluded that the stranger was a traveler. The one-armed lizard confirmed this, admitting that he was old and crippled but had spent years wandering the desert in search of a tribe willing to take him in. Along the way, he memorized the locations of vital resources. Jal and Rockra asked whether he truly remembered the paths leading to places where their clan could settle. He replied that he had once seen fertile lands near a great river, where water buffalo and small animals thrived, and where trees and bushes grew in abundance. Still, he admitted with a grimace that it had been a long time since he had been there, and he could not guarantee that these oases still existed. Rockra asked whether he had encountered other exiles like them, and if it was possible they could form tribes and live together in such places. The one-armed lizard shrugged, saying it was possible. Leaning closer to Jal, Rockra whispered that it would be wise to join forces, though she doubted the others would agree. In that case, she suggested, they would have to be conquered. The one-armed lizard overheard and remarked that with such strength and conviction, Rocker might very well succeed in that plan. Rocker stood and demanded how the traveler could prove he truly knew the way. Unafraid, the old lizard explained that he had crossed the desert many times and faced countless strong warriors. Lifting his single hand, he pointed toward the sky. That, he said, would show them the path. To Rocker and Jal, who saw only the vast blue sky, this seemed doubtful, but the lizard smiled and insisted. The stars would guide them. That evening, after sunset, they gathered again beneath a clear, starlit sky. The old lizard explained that he had studied the stars for years, learning their movements and devising his own system to navigate. The stars always followed the same paths, and with careful observation, one could never lose the way. To prove his knowledge, he invited Rocker to test him choose a star, and he would predict where it would appear the following night. Rocker agreed, and they decided to meet again the next evening. Rocker was intrigued and impressed by the idea of traveling with guidance from the heavens. As he pondered, a lizard guard named Y passed by, looking troubled. Rocker asked if his mood was because of the Manhwa, a monster they half-jokingly called a baby. Y admitted that after receiving food from Jor, the creature had begun to treat him with respect and caused no further problems. Rocker was pleased by this progress and lifted his gaze once more to the night sky. Jol hesitantly called out to him again, saying he had something on his mind. He explained that his friend Y had told him the clan would soon have to abandon the oasis because their food supply was running low. Rocker confirmed this after welcoming the Blue Lizard clan. Their numbers had grown, and the oasis could no longer sustain them. Jol reminded Rocker how he had fed the Manhwa earlier, gaining its obedience, and suggested an idea. What if they tried the same with other animals? Rocker was thoughtful. What animals did he mean? Could this truly be useful? Jol admitted he wasn't certain, but if it worked with the Manhwa, perhaps it could work with others. He guided Rocker to a slope that offered a clear view of the horizon. Carefully scanning the land, he pointed toward the direction he wanted to explore. Below, several water buffaloes were resting. If you try to feed them, they won't run away, he explained. They'll follow the food. With the lizardmen's decision to attempt taming buffaloes, a notification appeared on Nebula's screen. A new skill, animal husbandry, had been unlocked. According to the theory of human development, civilization began along two main paths: agriculture and animal husbandry. Nebula already knew of these directions from the game. Both were viable in the early stages, providing heroes with valuable resources. Great civilizations were often built near large bodies of water, since water was the most essential resource. Yet there was a crucial nuance. By choosing a species that was a predator, Nebula had determined that animal husbandry would be the most effective starting point for this civilization. The lizardmen were strong, resilient, and adaptable, able to shift their homes depending on conditions and resource needs. Animals could be moved with them, ensuring survival and growth. Another skill soon became available: metalworking, thanks to the knowledge of a master from the Blue Lizard clan. Nebula confirmed it immediately. Rocker considered the master's proposal and accepted. Together, they cut down several trees to prepare for the experiment. Everyone watched closely as the first stage began: smelting. The master built a brazier, stacking it with firewood and sealing it with clay to contain the heat, leaving only a small hole for airflow. From wooden boards, he crafted a round frame with a hole in its center. A stick was inserted and spun rapidly between his palms. As the stick turned, it pushed air into the brazier, intensifying the fire. These became the first primitive blowers. Next came shaping, a process demanding strength and precision. The craftsman worked with great focus on the heated metal. His first creations were spearheads, the tribe's most essential tools for hunting and defense. Though primitive, they marked a new level of advancement. The iron tips were far less refined than polished bronze, but for the Rakra tribe, who had only ever used stone tips, this was a monumental achievement. From his throne, Nebula observed the progress with satisfaction. Each step brought them closer to his grand vision. He was especially pleased with Rakra's ability to lead and adapt. It was then he remembered another unexpected skill, brought to him by a one-armed lizard traveler. This traveler unknowingly possessed the knowledge of an astronomer, able to navigate the starry sky. As agreed, they met again under the night sky. The traveler began sharing his primitive theories on the movement of stars. Although simple, Nebula recognized its potential. The one-armed lizard pointed out a star exactly where he had predicted. confirming the truth of his words. Impressed, Rakra accepted him as an advisor and future leader within his clan. Afterward, Rakra remained on the hill alone, reflecting on the responsibilities before him. All the knowledge and skills granted by the nameless beetle god were now his to wield. It was up to him to use them wisely. From the hilltop, Rakra gazed upon the oasis, his home, the birthplace of a new life. In prayer, he asked the nameless beetle god for strength and guidance. Soon after, he gathered his people to announce his decision regarding the future of their clan. It had been a long time since the nameless god brought them to this land, a place that had sustained them through countless hardships. This divine guidance had reunited them with their kin, the blue lizards, offering an opportunity for unity and shared knowledge. Rakra's clan could have rejected them, as they had in the past, and remained isolated in the oasis. But they did not. The beetle god had led them here with purpose. The oasis held enough food and water to sustain their growing numbers for many years. Those they once might have cast out perished in the desert, victims of starvation or larger predators. But their merciful god had a different plan. By granting Rakra the strength to overthrow the old leader and unite the tribes, the god ensured survival and prosperity. This union was not only possible, it was necessary, and it was good for them all. The Blue Lizard clan had been saved. They had achieved much and learned from one another. Jal and the others listened intently, consulting repeatedly as they discussed their next course of action. She already knew Rakrak's plan. He had said they must leave before dawn. Immediately, a murmur spread through the crowd. Everyone knew departure was possible, but not so soon. Rakrak's eyes fell upon a one-armed traveler in the gathering. He gestured for him to step forward. The traveler explained that he could navigate by the stars, and Rakrak, convinced of his words, declared him their guide. Rakrak asked him to show everyone where he would lead them, and how he read the stars to find their path. The tribesmen leaned in with interest as the traveler pointed to the great stars above, explaining their movement. He told them that when the first rays of the sun appeared, they would march straight ahead for 10 days. After that, they would turn right and walk along the rotten lake for 15 more days. This route would lead them into a barren valley, and crossing it would bring them to low mountains in another 3 days. Beyond those peaks lay their destination, the endless forest. There, countless animals thrived, and many other races dwelled. Rakra agreed this was the perfect place to begin anew. The one-armed lizard supported his words, thanked the traveler, and proclaimed that from now on they would follow him. The traveler nodded in acknowledgement before stepping back into the crowd. Rakra then approached the altar. Placing his foot on the first step, he continued speaking to his tribesmen. Though surprised by the gesture, they remained silent, listening closely. Soon he stood upon the altar with both feet and addressed them with renewed conviction. "We met God even before this altar was built," he declared. "God is not bound to stone or place. We will raise an altar again somewhere else." He called upon a young lizard named Yuri, fixing his eyes on him throughout the speech. Then Rakrak questioned him about the buffaloes they had captured the previous day. "Why," he asked, "are they still alive when we have not eaten a single one?" Jal, caught off guard by the question, glanced at Yuri, who struggled to answer. To guide him, Rakrak posed leading questions. Finally, Yuri replied that when they caught the buffaloes and brought them to the oasis, the hunters had not yet been overcome by hunger. So, they restrained themselves. Rakrak pressed further. "Do you understand why I ordered that the buffaloes not be killed?" Hesitant, Yuri admitted he was unsure, but reasoned aloud. The hunt had been exhausting, and capturing the beasts alive had cost them great effort. Yet they had endured, for their hunger was not yet overwhelming. Rakrak nodded. "If you can resist temptation now, you can seize greater strength when the true time of need arrives." At last, Jal understood. The buffaloes would feed them when their hunger became unbearable. Rakrak looked upon his people with pride. Yuri had proven himself not only a brave warrior, but also thoughtful and wise. Rockrak praised him and urged everyone to follow his example. "We must learn to think not only of today," he said. Yuri responded humbly that there was no need for thanks, for he only followed the orders of his leader, whom he trusted completely. The clan agreed to continue showing restraint, leaving the buffaloes untouched until their hunger demanded it. To reward their loyalty and discipline, Rakra summoned the craftsman. The man emerged with newly forged spears, no longer tipped with heavy stone, but with sharpened iron points. The ironworker demonstrated the weapons before the soldiers, who stared wide-eyed in awe. He handed one to Rockrak, who inspected it carefully and nodded in satisfaction. The weapon was lighter, sharper, and deadlier than any stone-tipped spear. Rakra then called Yuri forward once more. Placing the iron spear in his hands, he declared it a reward for his wisdom. Afterward, he summoned the warriors who had helped bring the buffaloes alive to the oasis. He praised their endurance as deserving of recognition and presented each of them with a spear. The soldiers twirled the weapons in their hands, testing their balance and sharpness, then lined up proudly before their leader and the altar. The rest of the clan looked on in awe at their new weapons. Jal, however, knew this was only part of Rockrak's plan. She was aware that he and his master had secretly forged the spearheads and intended to gift them to the warriors. Yet what happened next was something she had not foreseen. He lifted one of the water buffalo skulls from the altar and held it high before the soldiers. Extending the skull forward, he ordered the warriors who had been entrusted with spears to step forward, one by one. As they approached, Rocker's voice carried with authority, calling them the worthy warriors of his clan. Then, he placed the water buffalo's skull against his own face. His voice rang out. They were leaving this place, but God would go with them. As the soldiers moved closer, he reminded them of the difficult road ahead, praising the willpower they had already shown. The first to approach was Yura, the lizard man. Rocker commanded him to kneel. Placing the skull of the buffalo upon him, Rocker lifted him up, turned him toward the crowd, and declared in a powerful voice that Yura was now a bone warrior. From that day forward, he was bound to wear and wield this skull as his warrior's symbol. This, Rocker proclaimed, was the will of their nameless beetle god. Yura trembled with emotion, nearly overcome by the weight of this moment. Tears welled in his eyes. Rocker nodded with understanding and advised him to bind the skull with a lace so it would never fall away. Thus, a new brotherhood of warriors was born, the Bone Warriors. They would now fight in the name of the nameless beetle god. Though they cherished this oasis, the land that had saved their lives, they had to abandon it and seek a new home. Their god was not confined to the altar they had built. He had existed long before it. Therefore, they were not bound to this place. The one-armed traveler would guide them to a new land, where they would settle as God willed. Rocker's voice rose to a commanding shout, echoing over the crowd. He told them to remember the nameless beetle god and engrave his name into their hearts. He did not promise the road would be easy, but urged them not to fear. Just as they had resisted the temptation of the buffalo, they would endure and reach their goal. The warriors were swept with emotion. Spears rose high, waved toward the mountains in praise of their leader and their god. Standing upon the remains of the bone altar, Rocker gazed skyward, ignoring the roaring voices of his people. "God is with us," he repeated. Then, as if in answer, a butterfly drifted into the air above him. Rocker took it as a sign, a divine approval of his actions. It landed lightly upon his finger, beat its wings, and flew away. Closing his eyes, Rocker silently asked forgiveness for using the god's name. But he knew the butterfly's appearance was a blessing, proof that the nameless beetle god was not angered. Nebula, watching closely, was pleased. His choice of Rocker as priest had not been in vain. Yura, the lizard warrior, placed deeper trust in Rocker. His trustworthiness rose from 4 points to 7, and he advanced to a level 3 warrior. Rocker himself became a second-level priest. His leadership doubled from 7 to 14, and he grew into a third-level warrior. He had proven himself as a leader, guiding his clan toward growth and strength. Nebula was satisfied. For days they marched across the merciless desert. The sun beat down without pity, and the clan survived on whatever scraps they could find along the way. Rocker followed the one-armed guide, carrying the Manhwa. The small creature hissed in displeasure, and Rocker glanced down, puzzled at what troubled his companion this time. Calling softly, even mockingly, Rocker coaxed the creature. But Manhwa dropped onto the burning sand and refused to move. Rocker frowned and asked what was wrong, insisting that it could not simply lie there, they had to continue. The one-armed lizard man sighed, suggesting that Manhwa was exhausted from carrying the water jugs for nearly the entire clan. Rocker asked if they could rest briefly to allow Manhwa to recover. The guide shrugged. They had no choice. Rocker turned to the caravan and raised his voice, announcing that they would stop, but only for a short rest. His order passed down the line of warriors, repeated loudly from one to another. Everyone take a short rest. As they settled, Rocker gazed ahead at the barren path. Would they find the place he had promised them? He let out a long breath, feeling the weight of hunger gnawing at him. Approaching the guide, he asked how long they had been on the mountain road. By his count, it had been 3 days. The guide confirmed. Rocker's expression grew grim. Supplies were nearly gone, and their strength was fading. The one-armed lizard explained that the mountain passage was only supposed to take 3 days, yet no end was in sight. The clan was running out of food and water. Rocker let out another weary sigh. Once again, they found themselves in trouble. At this point, there was only one thing left he could do: trust in God and hope for a miracle. Suddenly, he heard one of the soldiers shouting. The man was running toward him in a hurry. Rocker stepped ahead of the caravan to meet him, with the guide waiting nearby. As the soldier approached, he shouted frantically, announcing that he had spotted another tribe ahead. When he finally reached Rocker, he tried to calm him down and asked for a clear report. But the man, still overwhelmed, blurted out that the strangers were freaks without scales. Catching his breath, he added that he had seen green-skinned orcs moving through the gorge in their direction. They had already noticed him and nearly caught him before stopping directly in front of Rocker. One of the orcs shouted with excitement, eager for battle and bloodshed. But when they noticed the massive caravan standing before them, their enthusiasm wavered. One of them spoke, insisting they had no interest in this road and only wished to leave. He assured Rocker that they were not enemies, claiming that their true foe was hiding beyond this place. Rocker listened carefully, though he remained convinced they were only intimidated by the size of his forces. Deciding to test them, he asked permission to pose a question. The orcs, puzzled by his tone, hesitated until their leader finally allowed it. Seizing the moment, Rocker sought to lift the spirits of his warriors and provoke the orcs at the same time. With mockery in his voice, he asked if it was true that they truly had no scales, then added cruelly that they looked more like burnt carcasses. His soldiers struggled to contain their laughter, covering their mouths with their paws to avoid interrupting the exchange. The orcs, however, grew furious. Rocker pressed further, demanding to know why they had come if not to fight or plunder. The orc leader responded defiantly by throwing his hammer at Rocker's feet. He bent one knee and apologized, admitting openly that he knew who would win this fight. He repeated that they only wanted to pass through as quickly as possible, denying any intention of stealing food. Clearly, there had been some misunderstanding. Rocker offered them a leaf with a few roots, though his expression made it clear he did not trust them. After all, they had been chasing one of his men. The orc leader explained their situation. They were in a hurry because they had been forced to abandon their home and wander in search of food for their tribe. This troubled Rocker. He asked why they had fled their home. The orcs admitted they had left everything behind and escaped into the desert, driven away by something that had terrified them beyond reason. While waiting for their explanation, Rocker noticed one of the orcs could no longer resist and began eating the food he had been given. The orc leader pointed toward a nearby hill. Their tribe had lived in a valley between the hills, small but rich enough in resources to survive until the monster appeared. His voice faltered as he lowered his head, trying to hide his despair. From his words, it was clear the creature was powerful, something beyond their ability to defeat. Nebula, observing the situation, paid close attention to the orc's account. The story reminded him of the Forgotten World, a game where the gods had abandoned the planet, but their monstrous creations remained. He quickly searched the monster database for anything resembling the orc's description. The result matched perfectly an abomination. It was exactly as they described, an ancient crustacean-like monster. Its stats were terrifying strength 120, intelligence 12, and sociality 4. The game database noted that abominations were creations of the gods, empowered with divine energy. Its body was covered in a hard shell, crawling insect-like with countless legs, and stretching over 20 meters in length. Together with the orc leader, Rakra climbed the hill to see the beast for himself. The sight before them was almost beyond belief. The monster was massive, terrifying in form. The lizardmen stood in silence, careful not to draw attention. As they peered down at it, the orc whispered to Rakra it was indeed an abomination. The creature was curled into a ball, its long limbs stretched outward, asleep among a field of bones and skeletons. Gifted with divine power, its enormous fangs glistened, carrying venom strong enough to kill with a single bite. Nebula carefully studied the abomination, analyzing its characteristics. He concluded that, at this stage, Rakra would not be able to defeat it. Rakra himself realized the creature could have wiped out his entire clan if it wished. Concerned, he called for the guide and asked if there was another way to bypass it. They observed the abomination for a while longer. It was asleep, making strange noises that sounded almost like snoring. The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, for it felt as if the ground trembled beneath their feet. Their fear only deepened. The orc leader explained that the monster was talking in its sleep. One warrior, with a flicker of hope in his eyes, asked Rakra if they could simply leave. Rakra turned to the guide and asked how many days it would take to go around. The man began to count, explaining that they would need to return to the desert, climb the mountains, and continue on horseback. In total, the detour would take 8 days. It was far too long, especially since they had little food and water remaining. Nebula noticed Rakra's hesitation. It was understandable too much rested on his decision. His clan depended on him, and in truth, he doubted whether he could win against such a terrifying opponent. The clan members were already frightened, and Rakra himself was unsure if he had the strength to face the abomination. Nebula, unable to influence events directly, could only wait for Rakra's choice. Jal stepped forward. She could see the weight of doubt pressing on Rakra and, as always, sought to help him find a solution. Her insight mattered greatly to him. Observing the steep rock beneath which the monster slept, she noticed a massive boulder perched near the cliff's edge. Studying it more carefully, she realized there were actually 3 of them. This, she thought, gave them a chance. She shared her idea with Rakra. If they planned it properly, they wouldn't need to waste time retreating to the desert. By working together, they could succeed. Nebula admired Jal. She was a warrior, a leader with sharp intelligence and intuition, and someone deeply trusted by the clan. Jal urged them to act quickly. Right now, the monster was asleep, and they had the advantage. The orc leader was startled by her words. Advantage. He feared the beast could wake at any moment. Jal reminded Rakra of the method used by the blacksmiths to fan flames more quickly. Rakra recalled the tool bellows. It allowed fire to ignite with little effort, though it took a craftsman time to make. They did not have such tools with them. But Jal explained they didn't need anything complicated. The stones themselves could be their weapon. With spears, sticks, and leverage, they could roll the boulders down. The monster was lying in a gorge, a natural trap, while they stood high above. If done correctly, the heavy stones could crush it. At her command, the soldiers began to push one of the stones closer to the edge, using fallen tree trunks they had gathered. Jal directed them carefully when to push, when to pause, when to set the rhythm. With every coordinated effort, the stones swayed more and more. The lizard folk were fortunate to find thick tree trunks, which gave them the strength to press harder. The key was rhythm, timing, and precision. Once they slid the lever beneath another boulder, half the work was complete. Jal ordered them to focus on her instructions. On the count of 1, they would lower the lever. On the count of 2, they would raise it. If calculated perfectly, the stones would crash directly onto the monster's head. Their movements grew smoother and more confident. Success felt close. Nebula was impressed by Jal's plan. It was simple, effective, and spared Rakra from confronting the monster directly. The ancient abomination was powerful, but if struck by massive boulders, even such a beast could be destroyed. Simultaneously, Nebula himself was uncertain whether their plan would even work. It demanded absolute mathematical precision to succeed. Jal never stopped giving orders, urging her soldiers to roll the massive stones as quickly as possible toward the cliff's edge. The boulders were enormous and required tremendous effort, yet the soldiers gathered every ounce of strength they had left and pushed together with determination. With one final attempt, they managed to lift a stone. It tumbled off the rock, bounced into the air, and instantly shot downward. Their coordinated effort filled them with pride, as the results proved the power of their teamwork. The stones plummeted with terrifying speed, and the impact would surely be devastating. The roar of a falling boulder startled the abomination, forcing her awake. She lifted her head to see what was happening, but the stone was already directly above her. It was far too late to dodge.